From seed to shipment, from small business to big sale, this is Trade Routes. We're your hosts, Tiffany and Addie. Every month, we'll talk about how a product produced in the Western U.S. makes its way to global markets. If you listened to our last episode, you know that this month's theme is sauces. In the second half of the month, we dive deeper into a specific aspect of international trade. On today's episode, we're exploring the ins and outs of packaging considerations for international exports. We'll be shipping a hypothetical sauce in our examples, but these research-based episodes are meant to be relevant to anyone interested in international trade. If that's you, let's get packing.
All right, Tiffany. So you've perfected your perfect hot honey recipe, which we talked about in the last episode. You've already established a thriving domestic market like Eric and Stacy talked about, and you found the perfect distributor in Japan. You just have to get it on a ship, right? That's all you need to do. Not quite. What most people don't realize is that the glass versus plastic decision might need to change, that the cardboard box you use for domestic shipments might collapse in an ocean container, or that if you intend to use a pallet you bought at the hardware store, it's for sure getting destroyed at the port.
Yeah, you're definitely right. International packaging really isn't just bigger box sizes. It's a totally different set of requirements and materials and costs to consider. Given that, it's no surprise that the global protective packaging market was actually valued at approximately $30 billion in 2023, wow. And it's projected to reach nearly $50.15 billion by 2030. So a huge market that a lot goes into.
Yeah, so with that, in this episode, we want to make sure that you, with your hot honey company, and our listeners out there who might be wondering about how to get their products overseas, make sure they have the foundations to bite off the right piece of that giant packaging pie. We actually had a packaging science major at my university, Clemson University, and if I had done that instead of ag business, I could have done this episode in my sleep. I didn't, so we did do a lot of research for this episode. And like we said in the intro, we're using hot sauce, well, Tiffany's hot honey, as an example here, but these packaging considerations are something that really any export-curious company would need to think about before trying to get their products overseas.
So diving into what it means to package for the domestic market versus the international market. Packaging for individual customers versus commercial exports are two totally different ballgames. On the domestic side, for something like a specialty brand, your considerations are really going to be about the unboxing experience and that brand presentation. You're talking about individual bottle security here for something like a sauce and making sure that individual bottle is well packaged and well protected, but really focus on that presentation piece and wanting the end user to have a good experience on that side of things.
Definitely with social media. Yeah, you want them to be like, here's my cool hot sauce that I ordered all the way from Oregon and I live in Florida.
Yeah, totally. That social media piece, especially in the past, decade, has really exploded. You want things to be Instagrammable, and that's really a key piece of marketing for a lot of these companies to consider as well. For something like a hot sauce company, specialized boxes with dividers designed to hold those small number of bottles is what you're kind of thinking about here. And each bottle might be individually wrapped.
Yeah. And on the international side, oftentimes you need to optimize for volume, durability, and handling efficiency instead of that out-of-the-box wow that an individual consumer in the U.S. might be looking for. So there's kind of a packaging decision hierarchy here. You've got the bottle, you've got the corrugated case, and then which will eventually be shrink wrapped on a pallet. And the priority is that it survives 14 to potentially 30 days in transit on a ship or on an airplane, but I think most international shipping still occurs on ships. Multiple handling points and sometimes pretty extreme conditions. So this is going to add some additional costs per unit. So we're going to be going from protecting individual items with care so that your customers have a good experience, protecting mass quantities from any number of open ocean calamities so that you don't lose your whole investment.
Totally. A whole different ball game when you're talking about exports. Moving into regulations, now that we have those basics down, let's talk about those rules that aren't optional. So something like the European Union recycling standards is something to consider if you're going to the European market. 65% of all of your packaging must be recyclable there, 75% if it's paper or cardboard. Some countries have actually banned plastic packaging in Europe for certain food categories. So that's something you'll have to do research on if your food category is one of those to consider eliminating any plastic packaging that you may be using here in the domestic market. You also must mark any packaging for Europe with the appropriate recycling symbols, and those symbols are going to be different across the world. So you think about our recycling symbols here in the US, those aren't probably going to be the same symbols that you're seeing abroad. So something to think about on your packaging there. And then, of course, it's important to do your own research on each country's individual regulations because it is going to vary country to country, not just region to region. Given that there are so many different regulations out there, we actually have a resource that is launching very soon called the Trade Regulation Database. This is a resource specific to WUSATA companies that you'll have access to, and it's going to have all kinds of export information that you need to know by market. So things like packaging considerations, things like shipping information, everything that you need to know about how to get your product to a specific market will be included in this database. So while Addie and I said we aren't the packaging science majors and don't have all the answers for you, we do have a resource for you that will have all those answers. So that's going to be really key, especially if you're exploring new markets that you haven't been in before. Use that database, get all the information you need there, and that'll set you up for success.
Definitely. Another thing that database will have is also some of the labeling requirements that products have when they're entering other countries. So that might be a country of origin, that might be the importer name and address in a local language or local languages, product description, material composition, and barcode format. I learned when I was researching this that the US uses a 12-digit barcode format, but most of the world uses a 13-digit one. So of course, we have to feel like we're special and different and just do it the way that nobody else does it. But yeah, so that's something you have to take into account as well.
Yeah, that local language piece that you called out, I think, is such a key consideration too. Being sure to have things translated into local language is very important so that your end consumers can read your packaging and understand everything they need to understand there.
Okay, so since we've talked a little bit about the kind of physical aspects of shipping and the regulations that you have to meet, we want to dive a little bit deeper into the actual layers of the packaging. So really, what is it going to look like if you are making decisions on this as a small or mid-sized business trying to get your products overseas? And that first thing we're going to think about is primary packaging. So glass versus plastic. In the US, depending on your product, you might be for sure glass first because it has that premium perception. People often think that glass is fancier than plastic. Glass has flavor neutrality. It doesn't transfer, kind of a plasticky flavor that some people are a little bit sensitive to. And glass is recyclable in pretty much all circumstances. So that's a big plus there. But it weighs 3 to 5 times more than the equivalent plastic, has a higher breakage rate, and can often be more than double the price per bottle. So on that hand, you might want to think about plastic. Tiffany, do you want to tell us about the plastic side of things?
Yeah, sure. So on plastic, your considerations are that you're lowering your cost per unit. You are less likely to have packaging break with plastic, which is nice. However, on the flip side of what Addie was talking about with glass, not all consumers are going to perceive plastic as premium in the markets, domestic or internationally. So that might be something to think about depending on the type of product you're offering and how you want it to be perceived by your end user.
Definitely. So in addition to that brand image and customer profile, there's a lot of considerations around the world right now for doing the thing that is most climate friendly, most eco-friendly. And plastic doesn't always have a very great reputation. But with international shipping, it's kind of an interesting calculation because the plastic in its production might not be as eco-friendly, but shipping heavier glass might actually have a higher carbon footprint in some situations because you're having to get more weight to a different place. So for glass versus plastic, you not only need to think about the market and the way that you're positioning your brand, but also incorporate that cost factor and have cost benefit analysis on what the value is of sticking to one or the other.
So getting into our secondary packaging layer, we're going to be talking about boxes and palletization. So now that we have our bottles selected, whether we went with plastic or glass, we're going to be thinking about our cases and our pallets. So starting out with boxes, the export standard is a double wall corrugated cardboard.
Bit of a tongue twister there.
A little bit. So the burst strength, which is how much pressure the cardboard can take, which is a new term I'm learning through all this research, is 275 to 400 pounds per square inch. So really getting specific on what type of cardboard you're using here for your boxes. These boxes really have to hold up to a lot more than just a domestic shipment. So like we talked about earlier, going across seas, you are going to have a lot more considerations with how these boxes are going to last across, that ocean transit. You might want to think about how to minimize packaging here, but also optimize for pallet efficiency. Poor sizing often wastes pallet space, so that's something you really want to think about because pallet space is going to be very valuable on these export shipments, and you don't want to waste any money in the sizing of your packaging. Additional costs for things like silica gel packets and wax coatings are also something to consider if you want to control for moisture depending on your product.
Yeah, I learned when I was researching this that containers on ships can experience like rain in a sense where moisture rises and then condenses and rains back down onto the things that are in the container. So that's what those types of preventative measures would be for. Another cost trade-off, like, do you want to risk the container rain or do you want to pay a little bit more?
Yeah, lots to consider there.
Yeah. Okay, so the last step is going to be the palletizing. It's possible that you could do this yourself as a small business, but it's not probable. Most work at this step would be done by co-packers that include palletizing as part of their service, or third-party logistics, which I learned is 3PL for those in the know of trade lingo, that offer lots of warehousing services. So even if you're shipping a smaller size overseas, you might be able to combine that with another company or other products so that you're not using one pallet just for a small amount. And that's something that a third-party logistics service would help to coordinate. You also have to think about how to make the pallet stable and how to use the space in the best way. And I've learned that shrink wrapping is key in this aspect. In the domestic market, you're going to shrink wrap a pallet 1 to 2 times before it goes on a truck or a train, whereas the international standard is 3 to 5 layers. So things are really not moving around. The shrink wrapping helps protect you from all the bad things like the moisture, falling apart of your boxes, theft, which is a thing as well. And helps contain spills if something happens to break in transit.
Yeah, Addie, I don't know if you've ever seen the shrink wrapping process at something like a production warehouse. It's super interesting, though. I've seen it at potato warehouses for products going overseas and watching that shrink wrap kind of go around a pallet of product. It's one of those really satisfying things to watch happen.
Definitely.
All right. So moving into kind of the summary of what we've talked about today and kind of wrapping up our discussion on packaging. Export packaging isn't the same as domestic packaging plus some bubble wrap. It's a completely different engineering challenge. There are a lot of things to consider, and I think you can kind of think about it in 3 tiers. Compliance, number 1, protection is number 2, and then optimization, number 3. So the checklist you might want to go through here. Does your primary packaging survive the journey? So thinking about where your product is going, if you are considering glass versus plastic, for example, making sure your packaging is going to survive wherever it's going to. Next thing on the checklist, are your cases strong enough? So double wall minimum and having that moisture protection to protect against, that rain that you might experience on an ocean container. Next on our checklist, have you protected against moisture, impact, and temperature? And finally, does your packaging meet the destination country requirements?
Yeah, so with that, there's definitely a budgetary component. You should plan for your packaging costs to increase relative to your domestic ones because there are more things to consider, more protection required. But the proper packaging typically pays for itself through reduced damage to your product. You want it to make it overseas so that it can be sold to all of these waiting people. So most exporters find their sweet spot after a few shipments. Initially, over caution and then optimization.
So who handles what when it comes to packaging? There are co-packers out there typically handling everything from bottling through palletizing. So that is something to consider if you're a small business, especially wanting to work with someone who maybe has all the logistics down already. PLs can also handle palletizing and warehousing if you produce in-house.
And costs are changing a lot right now with tariffs and inflation. So we're not going to give you any specific estimates here of what's a good price for getting your stuff overseas. But the important thing is that you do your own research on costs. Put this in an Excel sheet. The corrugated cardboard, the glass. You're probably used to doing this for your domestic market anyway, but do this specifically with exporting in mind before you start to pitch yourself to potential buyers, because this really shows them that you are committed to exporting, that you're willing to build those relationships that we've talked about already. Show them that you're invested in getting your product overseas.
Yeah, and like we mentioned before, be sure to check out the trade regulation database that WUSATA is launching. That is going to really be a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about exporting your product to a specific market. So in that database, you'll be able to filter by market and then see everything from MRLs to packaging and labeling information. Really anything you would need to consider when you're looking to export somewhere new is going to be there. So check that out. We'll have more information on that database in our show notes and a link to where you can find more about it.
So, Tiffany, now with all this information about packaging, after talking to Eric and Stacy, do you feel ready to get your hot honey overseas?
I feel ready to do some research and then get my product abroad. I think research is definitely the key step here that I don't want to miss for my hot honey product.
Okay. Well, I'll stay tuned for it in the London market.
Good.
Thanks for joining us on this journey from farm to far away. We'll see you next time for more on the ins and outs of trade. I'm Addie, and this is Tiffany, and you've been listening to Trade Routes, a podcast by the Western United States Agricultural Trade Association. Like what you heard? Consider subscribing, leaving us a review to help others discover these stories, or reaching out to us at marketing@wusata.org. To learn more or explore export opportunities for your own business, visit us at wusata.org. That's WUSATA.org.